Behind the cold iron bars of that prison, one name echoed louder than the rest. He was the self-proclaimed king of the cells, a man whose shadow alone could silence an entire corridor. His control went beyond brute force. He dictated who ate, who suffered, and who survived. The guards turned a blind eye because even they knew it was easier to let him rule than to challenge his authority. For years, no one dared to rise against him. His cruelty was legendary, his punishments merciless. In a place where survival depended on alliances, everyone bowed to his will. Everyone until one day the wrong man walked through those gates. Before we go further, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because this story of vengeance will leave you speechless. When the gates clanged open that morning, a new prisoner stepped inside. He wasn't like the others. No tattoos announcing his gang, no loud curses to mark his territory. Instead, he walked with his head lowered, his face calm, almost indifferent. To the tyrant, that calmness was an insult. A man without fear was dangerous, and he couldn't allow anyone to look untouchable in his domain. The whispers spread quickly. He's just another weak one, and he won't last a week. The tyrant's men smirked, already plotting ways to test this stranger. But what they didn't realize was that silence often hides the loudest storms. The newcomer had eyes that carried secrets, scars that no one could see, but that told a story written in battles long before prison walls closed around him. It didn't take long for the tyrant to make his move. In the prison yard, where dozens of men gathered to eat their meager meals, he chose his moment. With a smirk on his face, he marched toward the newcomer, surrounded by his loyal pack. The yard grew silent, everyone waiting to see how this scene would unfold. The tyrant grabbed the newcomer's tray and tossed it to the ground, spilling food across the dirt. "This is my kingdom," he sneered loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You eat when I say you eat. You live because I allow you to." Laughter erupted among his followers, but the rest of the prisoners stayed tense, their eyes darting between the two men. The newcomer remained still. No words, no reaction, just a cold stare that pierced deeper than any insult could. The tyrant mistook that silence for weakness, not realizing he had just lit a fuse that could not be extinguished. The yard was buzzing with laughter, but only for a moment. When the newcomer finally lifted his head, the noise died as if someone had cut the air itself. His eyes locked on the tyrant, not with fear, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. A calm, unshakable promise. It was the kind of look that didn't need words. The kind of look that told a story of battles fought in silence, of wars survived without applause. The prisoners nearby felt a chill crawl down their spines, as though they were staring at a predator disguised in chains. The tyrant scoffed, brushing it off with a laugh, but deep inside he felt it too, a shadow creeping into his chest. He shook it away, convincing himself this man was nothing but another body to break. But everyone who witnessed that stare knew something had shifted. The balance of power in the prison had been disturbed, and there was no going back. It started small, almost invisible to those who weren't paying attention. Days after the humiliation in the yard, the tyrant sent 2 of his men to corner the newcomer in the laundry room. They thought it would be easy, 2 against 1, armed with sharpened scraps of metal. But what followed became whispered legend overnight. The clang of fists against steel, the thud of bodies crashing to the ground, and then silence. When the guards finally stormed in, they found the 2 attackers sprawled out, broken and groaning in pain, while the newcomer stood tall, untouched, his eyes as cold as ever. Word spread like wildfire. The so-called weak man was no victim. He had moved like a ghost, striking with precision, as if every motion had been practiced 1,000 times before. The tyrant's grip on fear began to loosen. For the first time in years, the prisoners had witnessed a crack in his rule, and the man who had been humiliated was now the one everyone whispered about. The prison had always been a place of order, not from the guards, but from the tyrant's iron grip. But after the laundry room incident, whispers turned into sparks, and sparks became fire. Everywhere, men began questioning the balance of power. In the cafeteria, eyes no longer lowered when the tyrant walked in. In the yard, conversations hushed whenever the newcomer appeared, as if they were watching a storm form on the horizon. Rival groups that had once bowed to the tyrant started hesitating, sensing that his throne was no longer unshakable. Even the guards felt it. They noticed the tension, the way prisoners shifted, the way silence fell whenever the newcomer passed by. Some guards secretly welcomed it. The tyrant's reign had been a thorn even for them. Others grew nervous, knowing that if chaos erupted, blood would stain every corner of those walls. And in the center of it all, the tyrant felt his empire slipping. For the first time in years, he wasn't feared. He was being watched, judged, measured against a man who had come to take everything from him. Desperation has a way of pulling secrets out of the shadows. To reassert control, the tyrant began lashing out at anyone who questioned him. But the harder he tried, the more people started noticing the cracks in his armor. Rumors began to surface, stories of the tyrant's past outside the prison, whispers that he hadn't always been the unstoppable monster he claimed to be. Some said he was nothing more than a small-time thug who got lucky. Others murmured that the scars he bragged about weren't from battles, but from mistakes and cowardice. One night, a stolen file from the warden's office circulated among the prisoners. It revealed the truth. The so-called king of the cells was serving time for betrayal, not bravery. He had sold out his own crew to save himself. The revelation spread like wildfire, and in the dim glow of the prison lights, men began to laugh behind his back. The tyrant's greatest weapon, fear, was slipping away, and the newcomer's silent presence only made his weakness shine brighter. For the first time, the prison was ready to see its king fall. The prison had become a ticking time bomb. Every corridor buzzed with tension. Every mealtime was a battlefield of stairs. The tyrant knew it. If he didn't crush the newcomer soon, his reign would collapse completely. Pride, fear, and rage burned inside him, pushing him toward the one thing he had tried to avoid, a direct confrontation. He chose the yard at sundown, the place where every prisoner could watch. Surrounded by his men, he stood tall, chest out, shouting loud enough for the guards to hear, but not daring to interfere. "This ends today." His voice cracked with fury, but beneath it, a tremor of desperation lingered. The newcomer stepped forward slowly, chains rattling with each move. No entourage, no gang to back him up, only the weight of silence and the eyes of hundreds watching. His calm presence was more terrifying than any weapon. In that moment, everyone knew. The stage was set. This wasn't just a fight. It was the end of a kingdom. When the two men faced each other, the entire prison froze. The clatter of trays, the shouts, the constant noise of hundreds of inmates, it all died into a heavy silence. Even the guards, usually quick to bark orders, stood still behind the fences, eyes glued to the yard. Every prisoner knew what this moment meant. It wasn't just about one fight. It was about dominance, about years of fear being tested against the will of one silent man. The weak held their breath, hoping for freedom from the tyrant's rule. The loyalists clenched their fists, praying their king would not fall. The newcomer didn't rush, didn't posture, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, calm as ever, his gaze fixed on the man who had humiliated him. That silence was unbearable. Some men whispered, "It's over already. He's already won." The air grew thick. In that pause before the first blow, the entire prison knew. Nothing after this moment would ever be the same. The first punch came like a thunderclap. The tyrant lunged with all his fury, a wild swing meant to crush his opponent quickly. But the newcomer moved like water, sidestepping with precision, his counterattack snapping the tyrant's head back before most even realized what had happened. Gasps erupted across the yard. For years they had only seen the tyrant dominate, never falter. But here he was, staggering, his pride bleeding with every second. He roared and came again, fists flying, muscles straining. But the newcomer absorbed each attack with terrifying calm, every dodge, every strike, like a man who had fought 100 battles before. Then came the moment that silenced even the guards. The newcomer caught the tyrant's arm mid-swing, twisted it with brutal efficiency, and sent him crashing to the ground. Dust rose, shouts echoed, and in that instant, the king of the cells looked nothing like a ruler. He looked beaten. But the fight wasn't over. The yard demanded more. and the newcomer, eyes unblinking, was ready to deliver it. Flat on the ground, the tyrant tried to rise, spitting blood, his pride screaming louder than the pain in his body. He staggered to his feet and shouted, "I'm still the king." But the words rang hollow. No one believed them anymore, not even his own men. The newcomer didn't speak. He stepped forward with the same calm intensity, each movement deliberate, each strike precise. A blow to the ribs sent the tyrant wheezing. Another to the jaw dropped him to his knees. Every hit was a reminder. Arrogance had a price, and he was paying it in full. Around them, prisoners began to chant, not the tyrant's name, but the rhythm of the fight itself, the sound of change echoing in the yard. The fear that once kept them chained to the tyrant was gone, replaced by something new, hope. The final strike wasn't flashy or loud. It was clean, decisive, and it left the tyrant crumpled in the dirt. His reign had ended not with a roar, but with silence. The silence of defeat. For a long moment, no one moved. The tyrant lay broken in the dirt, his empire shattered, and all eyes turned to the man who had stood against him. The silence was heavy, not out of fear, but out of awe. Then, like a wave crashing against stone, the yard erupted. Whispers became cheers. Quiet glances became defiant stares. Prisoners who had once walked with their heads bowed now stood taller, emboldened by what they had witnessed. The legend of the tyrant had died before their eyes, and in its place, a new story was being written. Even the guards felt the shift. Some exchanged uneasy looks, knowing the balance of power inside those walls had changed forever. Others, secretly tired of the tyrant's influence, allowed themselves the faintest smirk. The prisoners didn't just see a fight, they saw justice. They saw a reminder that no man, no matter how feared, is untouchable. And for the first time in years, hope lingered in the air of that unforgiving yard. From their towers and posts along the fences, the guards had a front-row seat to history. They had watched the tyrant dominate for years, turning a blind eye to his rule because it kept the other prisoners under control. But now, as his body lay beaten in the dirt, the uneasy order of the prison was gone. Some guards rushed forward, batons in hand, barking orders to restore discipline. But the prisoners didn't scatter like they once did. They stood their ground, united by what they had just witnessed. The silent newcomer had given them something the guards could never provide, proof that the tyrant could bleed, proof that he could fall. Others guards, the older ones who had long grown weary of the tyrant's corruption, simply watched with cold satisfaction. To them, the fight had done what their authority never could. It had reset the balance. And in that moment, everyone, guards and prisoners alike, knew one thing for certain: the prison would never be the same again. As the dust settled over the yard, the newcomer didn't raise his fists in victory, nor did he shout to claim the throne. He simply stood in silence, breathing steady, his eyes scanning the sea of faces that now looked at him with something new: respect. Stories travel fast behind bars, and by nightfall every cell whispered the same tale. The tyrant had fallen, humiliated by the man no one expected. The weak spoke of him as a savior, the strong as a rival to be feared. Even those who hadn't seen the fight swore they felt the ground shake when it happened. By dawn, the newcomer wasn't just another prisoner. He had become a symbol. A symbol that power could be challenged, that silence could be more dangerous than noise, and that vengeance, when patient, could be unstoppable. The tyrant had ruled with fear. The newcomer had conquered with presence. And now, his legend was only beginning to grow. The fall of the tyrant left a void, and in prisons power never stays vacant for long. Yet, unlike the old rule of fear and cruelty, the newcomer didn't seize his victory with greed. He didn't demand loyalty or force men to kneel. Instead, his silence and strength alone reshaped the hierarchy. Prisoners who had lived in constant dread now walked with cautious hope. The gangs, once puppets of the tyrant, kept their distance, unwilling to test a man who had dismantled a king without uttering a single threat. Even the guards, once complicit, treated him with wary respect, knowing he had changed the order of things without ever asking for it. The legend spread far beyond the walls. whispered in visiting rooms, carried by guards back to the streets. A simple truth echoed everywhere. The tyrant had chosen the wrong man to humiliate, and in doing so, he had paid the ultimate price. And before we end, make sure you've liked this video, shared it with a friend, and subscribed to the channel, so you never miss another story filled with power, vengeance, and unforgettable twists.